Hi, Antonio.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. It's been a while.
Yes. And here is AM. Hi.
Hi.
Good to have you with us.
Yes.
Very
likewise.
exciting. Thanks ever so much for joining. So we're going to make a start because I think it's the magic hour or half hour of 3:30 over here in the UK. So welcome to everyone who's joined us. I'm so pleased to be here today talking to AM Darke and Antonio Roberts. For those of you who attended last year's summit, you might have caught them in conversation then, and it was such a brilliant session. It could have gone on for a lot longer. So we thought we would bring them back again this year and to reflect actually on how things might have changed or not in that time. So we're here today to talk about machine learning and AI and data, but more particularly how machines are learning and who is teaching them. And perhaps we ought to be very concerned or at least very aware of these particular data people, the ones that are teaching the machines. I hope I'm right in saying that these themes are of interest to both our speakers. If they're not, we're in trouble. So AM Darke's work, fairlyintelligent.tech, which has only been available since June this year, actually, employs humour, satire and subversive strategies to question the role of big tech in our lives. In fact, through the work, AM playfully, if I might say savagely, gets us to turn our attention to understanding our complicity in these systems. The piece was commissioned for the ODI's Data as Culture programme by our guest curator, Antonio Roberts, as part of his online exhibition, Rules of Engagement. And I highly encourage you to take a look at that, but also to experience AM's work, Fairly Intelligent Tech, for yourself, because it's a real adventure. But I've got some questions for both of you. Welcome. It's great to have you here. And I'm actually going to start with Antonio. So Antonio, when the ODI invited you to create this programme of artworks addressing sustainable data ethics, your response was rules of engagement, that concept. Are you able to summarise your hopes as a curator for the show?
Yeah, for sure. Well, firstly, thank you for having me here. Welcome to everyone, and hello. So I'm Antonio Roberts, and what were my hopes for for curating? I guess it's just kind of I wanted everyone to sort of reflect on the lived experience of people who are affected by data misuse, data mishandling, and all of these hacks that are happening. But not just to think of it as say like, oh no, a system failed, some technology failed, but no, these are things that are actually going to really affect people, and what is it, and what's going to happen to those people once these things are happening to them. So that was my main aim, really, was just to highlight the very human impact of all of these things, because I think so many times when talking about data ethics, we're talking about it in kind of very abstract ways, like it's data, you're shifting this data from here to there, or you're trying to assess it in some way, but never really the people side of things. So my hopes as a curator was to be able to do that, to be able to communicate that, and really find many different ways of communicating this. And artists are generally really creative people, and they will find ways to communicate it in ways that are effective in many different ways. So hence why I think it's great that the three artists were able to create works for the exhibition that explore these topics in amazingly creative ways, ways that pose a lot of questions, but also I think in some ways do provide some answers.
Excellent. I mean, I suppose one of the things about the rules of engagement in life, I'm thinking particularly in social media terms, actually, we don't always know what they are. It's really interesting to me that the leaked memo that we've seen the last couple of weeks showing that Facebook they're very well aware of what the rules of engagement are in terms of feeding people content that they know is going to be palatable to them, but potentially, unpalatable to wider society. Do you think that people, citizens generally, understand what the rules of engagement are when they get involved in technology?
I'd like to think that we do, and I think there's obviously an increasing awareness of it, forever increasing, especially because even when you said, the leaked memo, I was like, well, which leaks memos? They're all leaking every day, or something bad happening every day. But that does a lot to educate people about what's happening, because in many ways the rules of engagement are spelled out in the terms and conditions of everything that we sign up to. But again, it talks about in very abstract terms. So I think we're increasingly aware of what actually can happen, and even the things that we can't anticipate. We see it unfolding quite rapidly. So yeah, I think people are more aware than ever, and more wanting some form of change. Hopefully.
And that's a good thing, right? So AM, turning to you, one of the things that you've said, which is fantastic actually, is that when you set about a piece of work, when you set about some research, you start with a question or a set of questions rather than rushing to a solution. What were the questions that were in your mind that you were seeking to answer when you started to think about what you were going to do with future intelligent tech?
Yeah. Oh, wow. So I had a number of, I want to go back to what Antonio was saying about in terms of our knowledge and awareness of the tech that we use and some of the problems. And I think that when I was developing this work, I didn't want to just revisit that awareness, because I think we are aware. We know how harmful these platforms can be. We know that our data is being collected, but we still engage with these systems. I think in some ways because that knowledge does feel abstract, it doesn't feel personal, and it also doesn't feel like something that an individual can address. Right. And it's also obscured. It's hidden. I mean, who reads the terms of service, right? You have something convenient. It's written in legalese. I remember years ago, I tried to read the Apple terms of service when I was getting a new phone. And it literally was so long, it timed out by the time I tried to get to the end, and I had to start all over. So, I think it's a little bit unrealistic for us to be fully aware, and yet we do have this sense of disease and uncomfort and knowing that something's wrong. So why do we continue to engage with these systems? So I think for me, it was really less about highlighting the issues and more trying to make them personal and trying to evoke some kind of emotion. Because when I got the brief, it was like, okay, especially when, I'm designing this work for people who are technologically savvy, who are aware, who are maybe building these systems. So how do you do more than say, this is scary or this could be harmful? And how do you say, what, how can we internalize this? How can I as an individual feel complicit instead of just feeling like I'm sort of just one and part of the masses, and what can I do? So I think making it feel less abstract and more personal, and revealing some of the ways, I want to say exaggerating the ways that these, the data is employed and the way the algorithms are used against us. But really, I don't think I did exaggerate. I think I maybe made it a little more clear, and I made it more overtly insulting, or maybe provoked the emotions in a different way. But just as you were, talking about Facebook, that's also what these companies are doing. They're provoking your emotions. They're just doing it for an end that keeps you in their platforms and keeps, you engaged so that they can continue to reap advertising dollars. Whereas I was trying to provoke emotions that made you want to opt out of the system rather than continue to engage. Yeah.
Let me ask you about that. And actually, people have got to experience the work for themselves. There's no way you could describe exactly what the work is about. But if you were able to just very briefly, describe the experience of encountering the work for people who are maybe listening who haven't been there yet, that would be super useful, because I've played with it a few times, and it is fun. It's very educational. It's very surprising. But yeah, would you mind just trying to explain
Yeah. Okay. The artist explaining the artist's work.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know.
So,
You'll do a much better job than I ever would, that's for sure.
let's hope. We'll see. So I describe it as a speculative fiction. So it's a speculative algorithm. You enter the site. The premise is that when you go to fairlyintelligent.tech, so that's the name of the work, and that's also the site where it's experienced. You encounter an algorithm that starts off very much in line with the sort of like calls for diversity and equity that we hear, not just from the ODI, but in tech, in these spaces that are, saying, yeah, we want to do better. We want your data, but we want to do better. Oh, if the data doesn't work, or the technology doesn't work, or if the camera doesn't recognize Black people, right? That harm is we don't want that to happen. And the way that we get better is that we get more diverse, right? If we have more people involved, then our technology gets better. That's always the premise. And so it starts with that same idea of inclusion, and it kind of presents itself as a more populist algorithm, as something that if you go through a brief screening, basically making sure you're not racist, making sure you're not fascist or bigoted in any way, then you can directly alter and influence the algorithm. So instead of having these, big, scary, evil corporations, just determine, and these, small group of engineers determine how these things work that impact our lives, what about you? Why not you? The work asks. And so you go through a screening just to make sure that you're, a top-notch quality person. I'm like,
I was not when I it didn't matter how hard I tried to game that thing. I was not a top-notch quality person.
Yeah, so it's making judgments about who you are. So as you go through the process of screening, it's recreating what the algorithms that we interact with every day are already doing, although it does it in a much more transparent way. It sort of shifts from being on your side to being somewhat against you, or maybe probing, or a little bit, antagonistic. But it definitely, when you speak to the educational part, it does talk about the harm that algorithms do, while also telling you the way to solve it is to give it more of your data, which to me is, this was the big sort of takeaway for me, was that every solution, it seemed, to the problem of data harm always ended up being, well, we just need more of your data, and then that'll fix it. So I wanted to recreate some of that absurdity and the danger, as well as the problem of sort of weaponizing diversity and inclusion, and even using it as a shield. So this is where you get, I use my own sort of parallel or alternate identity as like Black feminist scholar, like I'm the diverse person, so you can trust me. And so I'm trying to really play with those concepts so that we don't, continue to think this problem is going to be solved by mass surveillance, like intersectional mass surveillance. And I think you get that as you play through the work, and it's a series of activities, and I definitely encourage everyone to check it out. I think it's an enjoyable experience.
Oh, it really is. Yeah. Very definitely. I've actually got a question which links, it's a really I think there's a neat segue actually. So we've got somebody in the audience saying the machines are learning and we are their teachers. If AI becomes self-aware, would we know? If it was smart and intuitive, my contention is that it would not. It would go about its goals quietly. That's a really interesting idea. If AI becomes self-aware, would we know?
I think with that question, I think they already sort of answered like it at the end part of it there, because AI, personally, I still don't think it will get to the point where it's actually able to just completely be autonomous. It would go about its goal, and whatever goal we tell it to do, which might be to end world hunger, or it might be to stop a certain thing. So, it's still a computer at the end of the day, just being told to do one task or a series of tasks. And so in that sense, it will probably still do that. But I have no, I guess, fears necessarily about about AIs going sort of like rogue necessarily. I think it is still more of like the people who have programmed it, the humans that have programmed it. And again, going back to what AM was saying, like it isn't that we need more diverse data, more diverse intersectional mass surveillance. Personally, I think kind of like the AI itself or the way it's being used as the problem. Yeah, and so it still just do its one thing, which in many ways I think it does badly.
AM, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, as you were saying it, I was just thinking, wow, you know, the first response for me was, wow, that's terrifying. But then I thought, is it really? Like, does it? Because ultimately, whether AI is sentient or not, or gains its own kind of awareness, we're still going to be left with the impact, right? And right now we see disparate harm occurring. And so if AI suddenly became self-aware and started, you know, operating for its own ends, it still goes back to, okay, well, what are those ends and who programmed them? What values would it adopt? If the AI decided, you know what, somehow through all of the programming that we have now decided, well, actually world hunger is a bad thing and needs to be solved, and actually like patriarchy is a problem, and actually, you know, misogyny and racism. I don't know how it would get to this, which I think is part of the, like, one of the funny things I thought about with this project, I think I had talked to Tony about this, was like, what happens if you fed an AI like all of the sort of like most progressive bodies of thought? What if I could just feed it Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology or Sophia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression? You know, maybe, yeah, if we're feeding that AI and it decides, okay, I'm going to take care of this, maybe that's okay, but it's still going to be, you know, what are the results? So it doesn't really matter to me if it's actually sentient. That's not nearly as terrifying as what are the values, because no matter what, whether it's human or, you know, automaton, it's still going to be what were the values that are encoded. Like, yeah.
I used to be one of those people that always came down on the side of humans being fundamentally good, and I slightly worry that, you know, when viewed through the optics of technology, we're kind of, the evidence is not supporting that. I don't know what you know, Antonio, you had a very you know, delightful optimism that, you know, actually the AIs would never kind of take over or would never dominate, certainly not for nefarious purposes. But I wonder where you guys are on that optimism scale at this point in our technological evolution.
The AIs won't take over, but the humans controlling the AIs will take over. You know, it's still going to be the human directing them, like, you know, the human directing any sort of army, be it technological or human. And yeah, when you've got the opportunity to have absolute power, or, you know, when you've got the opportunity to control the system, it can happen. You know, and things can go awry, things can go wrong, the unanticipated things. But yeah, so again, not at all thinking that the AI itself will take over, but just the humans will make some form of mistake that will yeah, the humans will make mistakes. I think that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still thinking about, are humans fundamentally good?
Sorry about
humans
that.
Are fundamentally neutral. I think there are some humans that are just good somehow objectively, no matter what their context, and some who are just bad. But I think most of us are actually neutral, and we operate based on the systems that we're in, highly contextual. And this is why I think the problem with technology isn't the tech itself, it's that tech is accelerationist. So whatever systems we have, the tech just brings them to scale. So again, it comes down to values, and it comes down to what human systems are we privileging and prioritizing. And if they're bad, then they're going to get worse, because that's what technology does, right? It allows us to do more faster. So that's really the issue. It's not so much the technology itself that I'm fearing. It's also, you know, we have this without tech, the concentration of power. Even if I thought myself as a good person and I try to be ethical and moral, but if I had all of the power, again, one aberration, one tiny mistake that could impact millions or billions of people, now suddenly my impact is wildly harmful. So it's like, it doesn't really matter if I'm a good person or a bad person. Like I could be a bad person, but if all I can control is what's happening in this living room, who cares? Right? Like it's still about the disproportionate power and the concentration of it. And I think that's also, you know, as snarky as fairlyintelligent.tech is, it does make a point about who is controlling these systems. And even as it judges you, one thing that I like about the work is that you know, you can go through the process and it might insult you, or it might decide that you're not, you know, a great person. But some of the questions that it asks, we haven't gone with that level of depth and care when it comes to asking the people who hold the keys to our society, who are building these systems. We don't know if they think poor people should be allowed to have children, or if they think that rich people should be allowed to have children that they can't emotionally support. This is one of the questions, right? So we're not even asking that. The questions that, you know, the experience asks of the audience.
Really interesting. I'm going to go to a couple of other questions that have come through in the chat, if that's okay. So I've got AM, you talked about inclusion. How can someone building an algorithm practically include more people, and how can they make sure that they're the right people?
Oh, I don't think that, I don't actually think we need more people to be included. I think that we need, oh gosh. And I'm like, wow, this is, do I have to answer this question? No, but I actually think that's part of my point too, is that I shouldn't be the one answering this question, that these questions have to be, the answers have to be arrived at collectively. And I'm really a fan of having technology be in the hands of more people. That doesn't mean sort of building one algorithm and capturing more folks. That means that smaller communities, for example, should be able to have access to technology and develop algorithms or develop tech that works for that community. Like right now, we live in a time where we're having, you know, just a few platforms that are used for everyone, right? We're all on Facebook, we're all on Instagram, we're all on Twitter, we're all here. And so the sort of rules, now I want to say the rules of engagement, we're making them apply for everyone. We're not thinking about culture. I'm thinking about, for example, you know, so I'm Black American, and I grew up where like saying the N-word within my community was like natural and okay and not offensive. If you go and play, you know, video games that are known to be, you know, can be very, very toxic. If you have someone calling you that word as an insult, as a slur, like they may not get banned, nothing will happen to them. But if you were to say it as a Black person to another Black person is just part of your dialect, then you can get banned for using a racial slur. Like, again, that is not an equal approach. That's not an equitable approach. So that one size fits all that is always, you know, derived by some, you know, tiny, narrow group of folks that don't actually look like all of us and don't necessarily look like even the people that they're serving. Like, I think that's more the problem. It shouldn't be just one person creating an algorithm and then having like a weird focus group of like rainbow people. Like we need, I think, to think more about community and how technology can be interwoven into smaller, more focused communities that serve, you know, that are being served by the people who make the tech should also be thinking about who uses that, and the people who use that should also be involved in the conversation and the creation.
That's a really interesting point, actually. I do a very small plug for an ODI project around experimentalism in policy making, which is looking at that very thing. Like, how do you replicate some of the mechanisms that marginalized communities actually use to create a sense of belonging and a sense of togetherness in the analog world? How do you take that and use those techniques in a technological context? So how do you give people a sense of, you know, that community is built for people by people, rather than, you know, there being this kind of top down approach that somebody up there somewhere is in control. But I guess we all kind of, like, unless we've got our fingers on the nuclear codes, we all kind of feel a bit like we're being controlled. I've got another question, and because I'm conscious that let me just have a look at the time. We've got 7 minutes left, and I was actually going to direct this one towards you, if you don't mind, Antonio. The questioner says, we desire relevance in our touch points with machines. We desire relevance in our touch points with machines. They should know us. But we are gradually not accepting machines to monitor us or steer us. Is the path forward that we actively choose more? That's an interesting question.
I guess I possibly disagree with the premise of the question, that we want machines to know us.
Yeah.
Because I'm in many ways, I'm perfectly happy machines not knowing who I am or what I do. Like, beyond the, okay, I want this website to remember my password, I don't really care for the personalization of technology to the point where, like, everything's automatic and I can just wave my hand and things happen like that. So, but I know I'm me, and maybe there's people out there who want that. So yeah, maybe. So what was the second part of the question again? Sorry.
We desire relevance in our touch points of the machines. They should know us.
Yeah.
But we are gradually not accepting machines to monitor us or steer us. Is the path forward that we actively choose more? I'm not entirely sure I understand what that means. Make proactive choices, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'm all for proactive choices, but also having the choice not to choose. Yeah, so much of like, one thing that really gets to me is that so many of us are welcoming surveillance into our homes with, the cameras, like security cameras, the internet connected cameras, and that's not something you can. All these cameras. Hey,
ta-da!
But looking at that as, well, we just need more and more surveillance, and it's not something we can really opt out of. We have to play an active role in opting out of it. So it's like, I don't want my data shared. I have to. And if I choose not to opt out, if I don't know that I'm being surveilled, how do I know that I can opt out? So yeah, I want almost the choice not to choose, or to choose whatever I said first. But yeah, I don't want it to be default. Well, you didn't say no, so yes. And so for me, the relationship with machines is, if I had a choice, if I could be an active participant in choosing to be surveilled, choosing to have my things remembered, choosing to have personalization, sure. But unfortunately, that's not the case as it is now, where the default is just to keep collecting all different data points that we can. And only if something goes wrong, only if another data breach happens, do we go, oh, maybe. In fact, I literally have a letter up behind me of a data breach which happened back in March, which I didn't get the letter for until now. So it's just one of those, and I didn't even know that company had my data. But there you go.
Yeah,
it just keeps happening.
Yeah, really interesting. There's a topic that we haven't spoken about. We've only got 4 minutes left, and I really want to get onto it because it's something that hugely is hugely interesting, and it's the role of humour and gaming and performance in art, but also in our learning process as human beings. And I wanted to ask you, AM, about the role of humour in your practice. And because with this piece particularly, there's a sense of playfulness. There's obviously borrowing from gaming, the gaming discipline techniques as well. I just wonder how big a role all of those tools play for you, and why you deploy them in the way that you do.
Oh God, but I want to answer the other question because I'm the opposite of Antonio and I want all of my stuff.
You can answer both. Answer that one first.
I'll answer your question really quickly and I'll go back.
Okay.
Because that one's easy for me.
Okay.
I use humor because humor for me just makes the world bearable. I'm already so critical and feel so overwhelmed in general that I need the humor in order to make the process of working and finding those solutions and tackling really serious and important topics just bearable for me and liberating. And I think also thinking about the user, humor allows us to enter, right? To enter challenging spaces in a way that doesn't feel completely oppressive and doesn't make you depressed and doesn't I don't know. I'll leave that to, to the audience to tell if that's what the work does. But I just think it's a really useful tool for engagement. And then just going back to this last point, yeah, I actually want machines to know me. Like I have ADHD, and like the greatest thing that I've ever bought was this Apple Watch, because as soon as a thing comes into my brain, I tell the watch to do a thing and everything's done. And I love that it reminds me of stuff. I love that it tracks everything. It reminds me of things that it makes my life way more functional. What I want is control. I want to have that data. I don't want Apple to have the data. I want the automatons in my home, and I don't want anyone to have access to it. I want it to make my life easier. And so I think what I think about the power and who controls the data, and also consent. Like that's something we're not talking about, especially as we start thinking about, I'm working on an open source project. I'm like, okay, open source is supposed to mean that no restrictions, but then what is the responsibility of like a person coming from historically exploited cultures, have been culturally exploited, economically exploited, to caretake that and not gatekeep it? And, you know, how do we think about consent, not just complete openness where then you can be exploited? So I think that,
what, AM, that is a whole other round table that you just, and unfortunately is one we haven't got time for. I wish we did. I'd love to stay for another half hour. Half hour's not enough. We had half an hour last year and it wasn't enough, and it wasn't enough today. I've got to say thank you so much. We didn't get to all the questions from people in the audience. You know, hugely, that's so interesting, and hugely appreciate you joining us. So Antonio, thank you. AM, thanks so much for joining us from over there on the west coast of the US. And we'll see you really, really soon.
Right,
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye.